Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidil Mursaleen. Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Ma ba'd. We begin first of all by calling the rest of the panel and then we'll begin our discussions inshallah. So I'd like to begin by calling the Honorable Professor Datuk Dr. Sayyid Uthman al-Habashi to the floor. Of course, this is the Deputy President and Academic Officer at INSAFE. He holds a PhD in Econometrics from the University of Birmingham and more than 200 academic papers published in refereed journals globally. Datuk is also the Chairman of the Advisory Board of BNP Paribas INSAFE Center for Islamic Wealth Management. Welcome, Datuk. Joining us next is Mr. Nick Ahmed Zaki Abdullah. We've listened to his discussion on Sukuk and Sukuk risk. He is currently attached to RHB Bank in Group Treasury and Global Markets as Deputy Director in Business Origination and Fixed Income Syndication. He provides advisory and execution for bonds and Sukuk for both Malaysian and global bond Sukuk markets. If he could join us on the panel as well, please. Brother Nick Ahmed. Next, we'll be welcoming Brother Noor Azman Zainal. We've just listened to his quite interesting discussion on Takaful. Let's hope we can learn a bit more from him. He has 18 years of experience in Takaful and insurance. He's worked in multinational companies, including HSBC in Singapore, HSBC Amana. Brother Azman is Chief Marketing Officer at True BSN, responsible for product research, product development, and communication. Last but not least, Mr. Omar Sheikh, please come and join us on the panel. He is a chartered accountant by profession. He specializes in Islamic finance and private equity. He's also an executive member on the United Kingdom Islamic Finance Council and was recently awarded the 2015 British Muslim Award for his work in Islamic finance. Well done. The discussion on risk management and of course Islamic wealth goes hand in hand. In order for returns to be acknowledged, risk must be experienced. But how to manage that risk is the key problem facing fund managers, asset managers in private equity, in public equity, in Takaful as well. Because naturally Takaful companies have to invest in funds that have to manage overall risk, ensure that the pool is sufficiently clad for future claims. So it's very well tied in terms of risk management. But of course today, besides discussing the risk issues, we're also going to be talking a little bit about the ethical issues. And if you've seen the SRI booklet published by the Center, it emphasizes the issue of socially responsible investments, ethical funds, and how Islamic finance actually is inherently ethical. So we're going to talk a little bit about risks and ethics, socially responsible investment, and of course a little bit about Sukuk and how Sukuk are included in the portfolio. So we're going to begin with the first question for the afternoon, and I'm going to pose that to Brother Omar Sheikh. Now, the way we're going to go through this panel is we're going to ask a few questions. We're going to have our panelists respond to them, and then we're going to open the floor due to the time constraints, and let's see how that goes. There's going to be new questions that develop, and let's see how we can actually answer some of the pertinent questions on risk. Now, I've written quite a few questions for Brother Omar, but we're going to focus on a key issue that you actually mentioned earlier this morning. When you were talking about private equity, you talked about that ethical decision that one has to make, either opting for a school investment or simply moving into a company that will turn out to be the next Google or Apple or Uber. So the question is, first of all, based on these ethical principles, Sharia principles, and venture capital objectives, private equity objectives, how does one marry the two? How does one actually make that decision? Is that the way forward, looking purely from an ethical bias, an SRI bias, or should we still be counting the dollars and cents, ultimately the bottom line, and how we can actually, own our next few islands in the Caribbean.
Thank you first, Brother Ziad, for the question. I think it's been at one of the core issues that have been defining the mainstream ethical finance sector over the last couple of decades. There is, first of all, there is this understanding, if I can address the question from 2-3 different levels. First of all, there's this historical understanding that ethical finance or ethical investment means a compromise on return. There's a penalty on return. It's something for tree huggers, it's something for a different group of people, it's not for sophisticated investors. However, what we're seeing, and my comments are from the mainstream ethical finance arenas in Europe, what we're seeing is this understanding is now beginning to be checked, and there's a greater awareness in education, and there's a change in appetite from the millennials as well, to a degree, from the next generation, who are a lot more open to investing their money in a way which is socially responsible as well. Along with university endowments, who are going carbon neutral in their funds, and other institutions as well who have the political pressure or see the commercial opportunity for such. Now, I think the point, or the space we like to play in is, if I can draw it on a graph, if you have on the one axis financial returns, and on the other axis you have social returns. So you will find on the social returns parameters high up that side, you'll find the charities operating down there. No financial returns, but a high social imperative. Up the top side, with this low social returns, and you find high financial returns, you find just aggressive, maybe hedge funds or vulture capital funds and so on, right? You're just going in and are maximizing profits regardless of any other implication or consequence of that decision. But the key message that I think I would like people in this audience to get is today, in today's markets, there is no reason why you need to compromise financial returns for social returns, right? There is actually a quadrant where you can play, where you can actually have top quartile financial returns, and the way we like to operate is we will not compromise on that. So there should be no penalty for someone going into an Islamic fund or going into an Islamic product or going into an ethical product. But also at the same time, there's the opportunity for social returns as well, which is there. And I think the interesting space now then aligns to the next question, which is how do you measure social returns? And there's a whole bunch of dynamics around that, but I go into that at some other point. So I think at one level, at a core level, I'd like to say there is no compromise necessarily between the returns. Indeed, Islamic funds have been top quartile performers in all the statistics that are coming out since the crisis, because not only were they not invested in mainstream financial institutions, they were also invested in companies which are relatively less geared. So in an environment where you have shocks to the revenue line and you have a drop in the economy, companies which are highly geared start triggering their debt covenants and they end up being bankrupt effectively. So those two things have proven Islamic funds to do particularly well, but there's no compromise necessarily between the two. However, I would at the same time like to say, if or where there is a compromise, I would like that choice to be given to the people, right? So the chap to actually have the policies and the insurance, Takaful policy operated, or the chap who is his pension, or the person who's given the money to that endowment. I think people should have the choice to decide how much return they want on their investments, where they want their investments, the deposits lent or invested. And you will find on occasion that people will say, well, actually, you know what, on an X portion of my investment, I'm happy to take 6% return rather than 8% return. But this 6% returning asset is giving me much higher social returns than this 8% returning asset. So 8% returning asset could be a KFC chicken shop in Singapore, or 8%, the 6% could even be less, is a quality educational institution here in KL, right? Or in your local community, right? So that's a separate point, but I think the point of choice, my first point is there's no necessary compromise. The markets have got their instruments there, and we've proven that. Secondly, and this is not a question of compromise, it's a question of choice. I think people should be given choice, and to enable that we need transparency, and we need academic institutions to come up with good measures for social returns that people can actually develop. Great example of choice, just to bring this out from the abstract, is peer-to-peer crowdfunding lending. Great example of a market which is now worth in the billions of dollars and is taking over rapidly in the non-mortgage lending sector in the US. That's just some initial thoughts.
Of course, just to clarify, when you say an issue of choice, we'd like to know from a private equity standpoint, how much of choice do you actually have as a private equity capital raising company, as opposed to an investor on the street looking for a possible investment in a fund. So there he can probably decide from a choice, a range of choices. But from a private equity perspective, companies coming in tend to come in on a fairly aggressive level in terms of leverage buyouts and mergers and acquisitions and hedge funds, etc. So does that play a role in your decision making?
So for us, it's actually very much is a choice. So you'll find PE firms which will have particular themes. So it could be, as I said, growth capital in Europe only, right? Or in certain sectors, we only play in the fintech sector, in Africa, whatever it is. This, our choice for the fund that for the work that we operate is in growth cap, kind of social infrastructure type sector. So we have purposely excluded out the next, luxury handbag operator and so on and so forth. Not that there's anything wrong with that. That's fine. That's halal. People are doing that. We've got no issue with that. But we find from the partners we work with, social infrastructure, schools, education, solid returns, stable returns, relatively less counter-cyclical, and also positive externalities with the communities that you have. A great example is we created the first ever university community college structure in the GCC, where you do 2 years on our campus and then you can transfer to UCLA, Berkeley, wherever, and do the final year there and come out with a university accredited from there. And it's a community college style structure in the US. It's the first one of its kind anywhere in the Gulf. We know the education sector very well, and it's a complementary investment for us. But that was a great example of cross-fertilizing models, successful models that were actually in China and in the US, but were not prevalent in the GCC, and we brought that model to the Gulf. Of course, there's been challenges and issues in doing that, but we think that's a great additional add to the landscape of education sector for people. The problem in the Muslim world is higher education, right? The university level education. People go to the Berkeleys, LSEs, Cambridge, Oxford, wherever they will all run to Europe. It's even a shame in Islamic finance. Many times I'm telling people in London, people are coming to London to do Islamic finance at universities in the UK. I'm saying, what are you doing here? Go to Bahrain, go to INSEAD, right? They have a lot more depth. But this mentality, I want to study in London, I want to study in Europe, So it's part and parcel of the challenge.
It's reputation. Has a history, of course. But that will soon change, inshallah. Thank you very much, Mr. Omar. I think if we can move to Mr. Azman for the next question, and I know that you've fielded a lot of Takaful questions that might not have been specific to your presentation, so well done to you on that. So I'm going to make it easy, okay? I know Brother Mustafa said it's going to make it easy, and then, well. But look, the perception in the market with regards to Takaful at the moment, as compared to Islamic investment and Islamic banking, has been that it's not growing as quickly as the other two sectors. That we know. From a risk perspective, the macro risk on the Takaful industry, do you see that as a serious issue? Do you, perhaps as you mentioned, the issue of the dearth of knowledge from the consumer perspective, do you see that as possibly promoting this kind of scenario where Takaful is growing slowly because it's not well understood? Or is it because it is understood that some of the audience have asked this question? Tabarru is charity, and then I receive a benefit from the charity I give. It makes no sense to me. So is it that kind of scenario, or is it simply that we lack innovative products in the Takaful industry?
The answer is all of the above. If you look at on the macro side, whether Takaful is growing rapidly or not, okay, I would love to comment on basically based on Malaysian experience rather than global experience here. In Malaysia, the growth of Takaful, family Takaful and general Takaful is growing. And it's easier, I would say, to grow the Takaful industry on the general side. But on the family side, it is a challenge. Because if you look at one is the innovative product. You have to understand, life insurance industry has been around about 400 or 500 years maybe. You know, where I'm coming from, my sister company has been around in Malaysia for 90 over years. And the fund is like billions. And for us, Takaful, we are about to start. I'm a nine years old company. I've been with the industry, Malaysia, 9 years old. And one part is, yes, the understanding of the market. People tend to equate Takaful and insurance, they are the same. Even the distributor tend to equate these two. The distributors here I'm talking about, they tend to equate these two are the same. They are not the same. So we are talking about level of education, awareness. Once you equate these two, basically it's going to be tough for you to grow for your Takaful. Second thing is, in the Malaysian context, our market, like I said, I spoke about it just now, our market is driven by medical business. The challenge is the innovation. Where does the innovation, where would it come from? The research is quite limited. This is one thing I think we need to address. The research of Takaful, for example, the application of other types of contract, ijara, tawar, whatever. On the banking side, is well advanced, but on the Takaful side, we are still limited with wakalah and mudarabah, like I said just now. So you have a very limited space in terms of research, in terms of product innovation, and people tend to fall back to life insurance, the conventional side. If they want to buy, for example, I give you an example. Life insurance industry, they've got endowment, they got life, they've got universal life product, you know, they got so many types of product. But we, on the insurance, on the Takaful side, our model is very much investment linked type. So we have to do a lot more on this part. Researching, how do we come up with a more innovative product using innovative contracts, what they are, whatever, name it. There are so many things, so many contracts out there that can be used, can be applied in Takaful, but has not been done. So this is one of the reasons actually, just to answer your question.
I just want to add a little bit. I think when you talk about banking, it is a service that is needed by almost everyone. Whether you are a small player or a big player, you still need banks. Especially when you know that you need to put your money somewhere which is very, very safe. On the other hand, as far as Takaful is concerned, it is a product that you only require when you have fulfilled all your other needs. It is something that you do at the end. It is something that you do only when you have sufficient fund. Secondly, you find also that in certain societies, the penetration rate is very high. For example, a good example, of course, is Japan, where people actually live in fear of tornado, of earthquakes, and so on. Whereas in our country, this side, we seldom heard of earthquakes until very recently. Before this, we never heard of any earthquakes. Even in Indonesia, you find there are volcanoes. People live on the foothills of volcano until the volcano erupted. And some people feel that they can even control the volcano when it should or should not erupt. Now, what I'm trying to say is that Takaful is a different kind of need. And in most cases, you find that when the population or when society is threatened by certain dangers, they definitely know that they have to mitigate that risk. And hence, insurance or takaful comes into play. Whereas when you know that you are very safe, the only problem you may have is fire. Even then, people don't care. If I were to ask you now, how many of you have taken fire insurance against your houses? I think there will be very few hands, even in this hall. Why? Because we think that we are still safe. There is no point actually going into buying or rather going into takaful when we know that, we can take care of this. The tawakkal syndrome is also there. You see, you always tawakkal. Alhamdulillah. There was a big explosion in Europe, and it is in the middle of Europe where the explosion occurs adjacent or near to many, many countries in Europe. So much so that all the fire brigades from various countries came to that particular explosion. There was a huge fire raging, a very big factory. The owner of the factory was there, shouting to all the fire brigades, please go inside the fire and save my black box. But nobody dared to go in because of the heat. And he said, if you can save my black box, I'll pay you $50,000. Still nobody wanted to go in. He increased up to 200,000. Finally, there was a very old fire engine coming all the way from Norway. I don't mean nowhere, I mean Norway. This old fire engine have firemen whose average age is above 60. And this fire engine came straight into the fire, saved the black box, and went out. So they got the 200,000. And reporters came to the fire chief and asked, can you tell me what would you do with your 200,000? He said, the first thing I will do is to check my brakes. Thank you.
I'm going to go over to Brother Nick. Just before that, the issue of takaful, of course, as you've raised it, there are a number of contracts that one can utilize that have been unutilized. And the reason I'm talking about this now is because Sukuk just reminded me of this fact, that if we look at the issue of musharaka Sukuk, which of course people have been running away from and don't want to go near it because of the high risk. But musharaka Sukuk in practice have utilized takaful funds to reduce overall risk and manage the frequency of payments and dividends, etc. So the manner in which we're looking at takaful today perhaps is quite a limited focus. It's family takaful, it's general takaful, and then it's re-takaful. But from a takaful perspective, as Datus pointed out, it is actually a risk mitigant. It's a risk mitigation mechanism. And it's hardly being used. It can be used successfully in Sukuk, it can be used for education funds, as you've mentioned, it can be used for a variety of projects and products. And when we talk about high risks in private equity, then takaful options can actually be developed as a method of minimizing overall risk in private equity. So yes, I agree with you, takaful of course has not been very well explored, simply because it's looked out as the final frontier. I've reached my level and now I can contribute towards a takaful fund, not realizing how essential it is in one's wealth portfolio. Brother Nick, with regards to Sukuk, you've talked a lot about the issue of credit risk and how Sukuk are brought into a portfolio, and of course you've also touched on the issues of global risk and the selection of Sukuk. So, although I have a few questions for you, I'm going to focus on one aspect to begin with, and that is, do you consider underlying structures when selecting Sukuk? Considering the fact that debt-based Sukuk would provide a less risky exposure than equity-based Sukuk naturally. we know equity-based sukuk are quite limited, but do you even consider that in your selection of sukuk?
I guess, no, naturally, given on the sell side, we always try to gauge the demand coming from the investors. It's always been investors have been the main driver in terms of creating this demand. I can only suggest to them that if the market is not ready, then we're going to be stuck in this kind of area for the time being. It takes some time to educate the players, even coming from banks, fund managers, or even the players in how they're going to treat these assets in their books.
So do you think that investors are actually getting into sukuk instruments without necessarily realizing the risk they're exposed to in terms of a debt-based versus an equity-based sukuk?
Yeah, I think we are pretty much more comfortable in a debt-based for now. For example, we have talked about the Basel III treatment for the banks, subordinated sukuk for Islamic banks, even for Islamic players. At this moment, with how we market such products is still pretty much on the ability of the issuers to pay, and even though those instruments are treated as equity or hybrid equity in the balance sheets, but from the investor's angle, it's still considered as a debt. They look at the probability of the issuer to redeem the paper, say for example, it's a 10-year, 10 or 5 sukuk structure, for example. So they look at it more as a debt, which is, if they really analyze the risk, reward return, there's a lot more risk involved, and this may not be registered to the return that they're getting. They may be getting they should be getting a lot higher, given the risk involved.
Okay. And you've also talked a little bit about global risk. How do you foresee the next 3, or let's say 2 to 3 years in terms of the sukuk market? We know 2015 has taken quite a knock in terms of sukuk issuance as compared to previous years. So going forward, we know we have serious challenges in terms of oil price and then political risk across the Middle East when they have been issuing the largest amount of sukuk next to Malaysia. How do you see the market unfolding in terms of sukuk over the next 2 to 3 years, in terms of the risks that we're currently facing?
Right. Coming back to your question just now, in the past, the local investors tend to invest at anything like AA3 minimum and above. So, if you were to develop the market further to say single A market or even below that, that's where the market players needs to be ready to. There's no such mechanism or agency to expand that spectrum. I did suggest earlier in my slides about forming a credit hedging agencies. We saw that with Tanah Jamin or some financial guarantee, but there's still lack of institutions to take over to managing such risk as we go down the credit curve. I think that will be the next. Hopefully, that will be the next forward to breach the appetite in that space. That will obviously be the bridger from debt to equity, and maybe also can assist the private equity segment as well. So in terms of coming back to your second question on the global risk, I would like to stay cautiously optimistic, I suppose. I guess as we've seen all these challenges over the past 1 year or so. We've laid out all the risks. We knew what's coming, what's been happening. When it comes to, for example, in the GCC area, there have been the majority benefactor coming from the Arab Spring. There were a lot of deposits infusion into the GCC, mostly to the UAE banks, Dubai-based banks, and that have created demand for sukuks. Now, given where the oil price, the commodity price has been going, you'll see more of these issues coming from the sovereign side in how they tackle their fiscal and budget needs. So in a way, I'll see it as a positive, meaning that there will be more diversification in terms of issuers type in the sukuk space. Last time we only see the likes of sovereign governments and banks being the majority of issuers. Now we'll see more maybe corporate coming from various industries, tapping the sukuk. Everyone can learn from each other and as we grow the market.
Thank you very much. Of course, Sukuk, is quite an interesting topic, and the understanding of the underlying structures stems from its actual naming process. And if you look at the Securities Commission regulation issued initially in 2003, they refer to Sukuk as IPDS, Islamic Private Debt Securities. Branding, intentionally or unintentionally, the Sukuk product as a debt security, whether it was equity-based or not, it was understood from that level to be debt-based. So obviously, as you stated, it's still, the market has been in the kind of appetite that this is a debt-based instrument, and that's how we're acquiring it and including it into our portfolio. So it hasn't changed as yet. So thank you very much. That's all. We've, alhamdulillah, published, and you've successfully launched the SRI booklet this morning. So this question is a bit of a difficult one in terms of where we are and where we're moving to. Brother Munim Salam mentioned that ESGs, SRIs, they have been capturing a fair bit of the fund market. And on the one hand, we have Sharia compliant funds. Sharia compliant funds use a screening process. That screening process has been fairly stagnant since it began. Dow Jones Islamic Index way back in '98, and IOFI's implemented that process, and Malaysia, of course, has had its own index, and now we find after IFSA 2013, there's a fair bit of convergence between the Malaysian and GCC screening. So you have your qualitative industry-based screens, and then you have your quantitative screens. So it's been fairly standard in terms of its process. But if you look at what Munim was talking about earlier, and what the book actually talks about, is that SRIs, socially responsible investments, ethical social governance investments, seem to be gaining such popularity that almost 60% of all funds in Europe are going the SRI or ESG route. Islamic funds have not moved from the Sharia screening process. We've always stated that Islamic funds are inherently socially responsible. But now the benchmark for being socially responsible has been raised. Now, how do we bridge that gap in terms of the risk that the fund management industry is possibly going to face by savvy investors that are saying, well, you have not moved with the trends. You've just stayed stagnant with your so-called quantitative and qualitative screens, which were good for them, but it's not good for now. How do we bridge that gap when Islamic is supposed to be ethical inherently?
Thank you very much. You saved the most tricky one last. I think if you talk about being ethical, right? To me, when it is ethical, it is Islamic. And when it is Islamic, it should be ethical as well. That is the actual understanding of what Sharia is all about. If not, the Prophet ﷺ was not sent to improve the akhlaq. إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. Right? In other words, I have been sent in order to complete the ethical aspects of life. Right? And in other words, from the Islamic viewpoint, it has to, anything that you do and you call it Islamic, it has to be ethical. What we have done so far, we don't call these funds Islamic funds. We call them Sharia compliant funds. And nothing. That is the restriction. Or rather, that is the binding clause that binds you to say that as long as it is Sharia compliant, it is fine. And in order to be Sharia compliant, you have certain criteria that you use, and the criteria that you have been using, as you rightly said, has not changed very much. In fact, there were some differences between certain indices, right? But now they are converging. And so, when you talk about all these indices, they are producing what we call as Sharia compliant products, or Sharia compliant stocks, whatever, or Sharia compliant investments. We are trying to talk about Islamic investment. When we talk about Islamic investments, obviously the Sharia compliant criteria has to be widened. It cannot be confined to just the qualitative and the quantitative parameters only. I think it should be widened to include other aspects as well that make it Sharia. In other words, that is, make it Islamic. And when you talk about Islamic, I think here is where the Maqasid Sharia comes in. You have to widen the parameters to include all those things that are within what is called as Maqasid Sharia. Because Maqasid Sharia is very, very wide. Anything that prevents from harm is Maqasid, is Sharia. Anything that provides welfare is also Sharia. It's both ways, right? So as long as it protects you from harm, or it provides welfare or provides benefits to you, it is Maqasid Sharia. In other words, it is Sharia, right? It is Islamic. So that's very, very wide. So you should look at it not only from the financial or economic, you should also look at it from the social, you look at it from the political, and so on. Then only it becomes compliance to Maqasid Sharia, in other words, compliance to Islamic. In other words, in order to bridge that gap, you have to widen the parameters, or widen the area. It's no more what we have from times of old until now. I think we have to change that. That's one thing. The other thing that I like to comment also, which is not part of the question, is that as long as I have the mic, I have the right to say it. One of the things that people are talking about, especially those involved in SRI, involved in ethical funds, and so on, right? People are saying that what we should do is to run away from the letter I. If you can run away from the letter I, then you can widen your market. I have some reservation on that. I do not think that we should run away from the letter I. I think we should go on with the letter I, because I am confident that the letter I will remain forever. And that should be our faith. If we say that if we want to expand, we have to run away from letter I, what are we trying to do? I do not think that we can afford to do that, because you are taking a big, big risk in the future. You may not be Sharia compliant anymore, because people will change. Minds will change. Perceptions will change. And I don't think that this will allow us to maintain what we have been maintaining all the while. And I would like to say that the I should remain. But that is my stand. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dasu. Thank you. Yes, please.
If I may be somewhat controversial, seeing as I've spent many hours on a plane to get here. Professor, with respect and regard, I share your concerns in that sense. However, living in a different territory, I would also like to share some more concerns that the practice of the letter I, as you put it, is very defunct of its values. So I would question, is this genuinely the letter I, or Islamic, in the highest principles of Islam? Is this anywhere near principles of Ihsan that we should be striving towards? I would question when I see other activities which are more aligned with Islamic principles than what the Islamic finance sector itself is practicing. I question, where is the justice? Where's the truth? Where's the justice? Where's the fairness? And my understanding of Islam is that it encourages us to find that truth and fairness, as one of the purposes, as you very much said about the Prophet, the message that he gave. in addition to that, I think you have to, I'd also say, historically, we were talking the other day, the murabahah was practiced, before the Prophet became a prophet, right? So is it Islamic, or is it Arabic, or is it just trading as was the case for the people back? The ban on interest, I would say, is not the letter I. I would say the ban or aversion to interest and usury is actually the letter A, Abrahamic, right? Because it goes all the way back to the Abrahamic faith traditions. So considering all of these factors and considering the poor performance of some of the synthetic structures, if you take any commodity murabahah, I have tried to explain it to many of my non-Muslim friends in the office in London, to professional bankers, and so on and so forth, and they laugh. This is synthetic debt, Umar, right? And these are agnostic people of no faith whatsoever, right? And you have to, call a spade in that sense. So I would just say, whilst I completely agree with that, your concern, I think there are also other concerns we need to reflect on. And particularly when we are in an environment where we wish to do dawah, I think the prerogative of speaking the language of the people there is very, very important. And let me put on my commercial hat. I'm here to make money, to make business, right? As are my colleagues here. I've got to speak the language of my customers, my clients. If they want to hear the word fair trade, I will find the fair trade and tick the box. If they want to hear the word carbon neutral, I'll find that and I'll create the product and I'll tick the box. So I think there's other dynamics which possibly, kind of need to be, thought through as well in that regard. Sorry, just sharing it.
I'll take the mic again.
I need to come to the NCF library tomorrow, so as I said, don't chuck me out before I get.
You will be safe, inshallah. No, I think put it this way. I'm not saying that we should all the time use the word I anywhere. But the spirit of I must be there all the time. Right? I think I must put it this way. The spirit of the letter I must be there all the time. What I'm concerned about really is when people say that the SRI is now, as you rightly said, has been shown that SRI is gaining more share or popularity, right? What is it? Is it the Islamic one? This is what I'm concerned about. If it is the Islamic one, well and good. But if it is not the Islamic one, I think we cannot accept it. That is the main thing. So the spirit of the I, to me, has to be all the time there. We cannot run away from that. In other words, there is no compromise as far as that is concerned. Thank you. I don't think
Completely agree. Although I think, Professor, your earlier comment was so appropriate on building some of these parameters within Islamic finance. And as you said, we haven't done that. We have failed to do this. And for 20 odd years, I'm hearing this again and again. And that makes me question, what are we doing as all forms of institutions and stakeholders? Why are we not building these parameters that go beyond, as you said, the quantitative and the qualitative? Why have we not managed to build that yet? There's a serious question that needs to be asked. And the practitioners, we're struggling with some of the structures that we're already given from the Sharia scholars. If you ask us to go and build in a whole layer of another ESG and measuring social impact, we're going to be like, hold on a minute, we're still struggling with the product structures you're giving us. So there's a serious question in there that I think needs to be honestly reflected on people in this industry. Why have we failed to build these parameters?
Pending any other comments from the panel, I'm going to open the floor at the moment. If there are any questions from the floor, yes, we have quite a few, alhamdulillah. Prof. Shamshir, Professor Shamshir, please, if the mic is on its way.
First of all, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi. Thank you very much. I think it was a very lively discussion, insights from practitioners that had shared their experience today. I have just one question, a very general one, basically for the practitioners. talk about managing risk. And then we need tools to manage risk. Now, you know, the current thinking about the tools that we use to manage risk, some of you have highlighted indirectly in your speech. There seems to be issues of non-compliance. But then my take on this is, I just want your opinion on this, because when you're trying to manage risk, if you have nothing else, you have whatever tools available to manage your risk, you use it. But there are also issue of inconsistency in certain industries, banking industries, for example. They allow non-compliance with certain things, and then they say cleansing. And yet here, when we are in need of tools that effectively to reduce risk or manage your risk, then they say they are in compliance, so you can't use that. So how do you take this? I mean, there must be some form of standardization or thinking from the Sharia scholars, especially when they're coming to decisions of this nature and looking at practical issues on the ground before they decide on this. Because in certain industries they allow, and there will be certain conditions, and on the other side, for example, when you use a foreign exchange contract, for example, and you have exposed to foreign exchange currency, the risk. So, and they say that the contract has issues of non-compliance. Then what are you going to use? You don't do any foreign exchange transaction, you can't grow. I mean, if you are in that kind of business, so where are we going? So I need some kind of view from the practitioners. Anyone of you highlight or right?
I think from the bank side, on the banking side, I mean, we tend to engage quite closely with our Sharia panel when it comes to products. I mean, obviously there are some hiccups along the way, especially when we also have some commercial interests behind it. For example, like the Islamic profit rate swap, interest rate swaps. I mean, the local nation rates have been quite low for quite some time. I mean, ever since the last crisis that we saw was back in 1998 during the Asian crisis, and now we are obviously looking where the market is now. We are going into we may be going to some uncharted territory, given that we have been the rates have been so low for some time. So there's a valid concern that there's going to be a need for hedging instrument for us to manage the interest rate risk. This is where the issue with regards to the players such as asset managers. Asset managers, they are normally mandated by the corporates or asset owners, maybe pension fund, for example, to manage these funds. Banks have been trying to engage with the asset managers to undertake IMA documentation so that they can hedge the rates when the interest rate raise. The problem lies in the documentation because the asset owner still belongs to the corporate rather than the asset managers. So there were talks about having a tripartite kind of agreement, which I think some of the corporates or the asset owner may not be keen to engage. So I think it's much more of a documentation issues. I mean, we all know the risk is there, but until somebody have the conviction to keep the ball rolling, then only we'll see this more into practice.
In terms of the question of standardization, going forward, how do you feel that can actually be achieved? Because that's always been a debate. I mean,
it's a perennial debate. Yeah. I mean, it'll take forever. I think we've been trying to engage with our Middle East counterparts, with some of the regional, such as Indonesian banks, Brunei-based banks. It's still discussion. Yeah, still in the discussion phase. We can. Everyone is trying to have understanding on the same page, but still some way to go.
Can we argue that IFSA 2013 has taken a major leap forward in terms of that convergence of standards between the two systems?
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
That's a good point, Prof. The issue of harmonization is a lot easier than standardization. Allow every region to practice and interpret the manner in which it wants to within the overall parameters of the Sharia and work towards what are the commonalities between the two systems in order to move forward successfully. Yeah, of course.
Yes, I have a question about Takaful. During the recent WIEF conference, there were some speakers who gave very, very interesting examples of endowment funds using Waqaf. So I'm wondering whether, people in Takaful could look at Waqaf as one of the areas, because obviously a Takaful product is not supposed to be like a profit-sharing product. So is there a possibility about this? For example, if I could Waqaf some of my funds, to cover for my daughter's medical in the future, for example.
This is a classical question, actually, I would call it. Because the concept of tabarruk itself, we have a discussion with some of the researchers in Israel. And whether there is a difference between the tabarruk model now in Waqaf itself. And yes, there's a lot of debates on whether we should come up with a Waqaf. Okay, first of all, the challenges within this country is, so far, there are a couple of companies that are trying to come up with the Waqaf model. And unfortunately, these models are not accepted by the regulator, just to share with you. Maybe partly because each state in Malaysia have different Waqaf rules. That's one. So there are some, you need to fine-tune how do you fit your Waqaf fund into the Waqaf regulations within each state. That is one part. Okay, and second part is some scholars I would say, they say tabarruk itself is part of Waqaf. Waqaf is part of tabarruk. That was the argument. If I were to share with you, when I did have a discussion with our Israel researcher on this part, So ideally, if you look at the Takaful model, I know is in Pakistan they use a Waqaf model. In Malaysia we use pure tabarruk model. Even one of the three Takaful players, Swiss Re for example, they use a Waqaf model because Sheikh Usmani is a proponent of this Waqaf model. But this model is not widely accepted in Malaysia. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's because of the ruling just now. That would be something that industry practitioners have to discuss with the regulators, even maybe the government itself.
Thank you. Just before we move to the next question, of course, Waqaf in South Africa has been practiced as the fund for Takaful. We actually set up that model all the way back in 2004. And that Waqf model was accepted again by Mufti Taqi Uthmani, who then promoted it within the Pakistani region. And there is a difference of opinion in terms of whether it is permissible or not. But across the GCC, the Waqf has been seen as an alternative, innovative possibility for endowment projects, for investments in education, etc. So it is a possibility. However, as you say, of course, the Malaysian scholars have some issues with using tabarruk and Waqf, whilst other scholars see tabarruk and Waqf as part of the same instrument, as part of the same product, donating into an endowment and then gaining benefit from that. The next question from Sister Zainab in the back.
So, am I audible now? Yes. My question was regarding cross-fertilization and how do you use it to enter markets which don't have a sophisticated Islamic finance?
Cross-fertilization, sorry.
Cross-fertilization, and how do you use it to penetrate an economy that does not have an Islamic finance regulatory body, for example, there are no regulations. So wouldn't you be faced with new kind of risks? And how do you engage with the industry in that particular sector?
Okay, so for what I got from the question, probably I didn't hear it fully, but the reference to cross-fertilization I made was with regards to our investment strategy in private equity. So we will take certain industry sectors, technologies from one geography and bring them into other markets, sometimes within the OIC, within the Muslim countries, cross-fertilize that IP involved in that business. So we don't have an issue there on whether Islamic finance per se is developed or not. I mean, if particularly if you're bringing into the GCC or you're bringing into Malaysia, that there is Islamic financial markets developed here. The issue tends to be in the, maybe this is what you're asking, in the jurisdiction where we are acquiring the entity, where there's not an availability of Islamic finance. So if we buy a company, say it's worth $50 million, you're putting in anything from 20 to 30% equity, and the rest you're raising as bank debt. Again, varying depending on economic climates. The bank debt that you have to take, if it's not available Islamic, you have to take conventional bank debt in that situation. There are, of course, a few funny structures that we use. Again, those structures. I mean, some typical structures, Mortimeraba structures, Tawarruk structures, and so on. Some interesting leasing-based structures. One of the large firms in Bahrain had a special mechanism that used to be called the iron triangle for synthetically structuring using a leasing contract to structure the acquisition financing for a private equity target. But the principle is ultimately it depends on that jurisdiction. A, if there is Islamic financing available or not. B, if they will allow us to use the legal regulatory banking platforms will allow us to use Mortimeraba, Tawarruk structures as alternative or leasing structures for that. And we also have to consider if we do use some of these structures, are there any tax implications of that?
Is that
sure?
Yeah, I mean, my question was in terms of the disparity amongst nations, in terms of how sophisticated their Islamic finance markets are. Like, for example, you mentioned about GCC countries and OIC countries. So they would naturally have the benefit of solidarity with, the member countries, whereas a country which has a minority population might not benefit from that sort of fraternity of member countries. So how do you think the countries which already have a developed market could somehow, assist the other markets also to come up? Because unless we do that, students like me would probably not have an incentive to really, go back and do something.
Not a private equity related question, but just more broadly, how can you help develop these other markets? I mean, I think there's a lot that can be done. I'll give you a great example. The UK government recently issued a sovereign Sukuk of £200 million sterling. It was oversubscribed 10 times. But one of the reasons why it did that was because the Prime Minister, David Cameron, was in a conversation in a meeting with Governor Zeti, and Governor Zeti literally, gave him an earful and said, look, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this, because you're talking about Islamic finance, either kind of put up or kind of shut up kind of thing, So I think there's a lot of knowledge transfer, there's a lot of education and awareness. We've built Islamic finance in the UK in a secular context. In the UK government, we haven't had the same political will and support that you've had here clearly in Malaysia. So as a result of that, we've been asked and been appointed to advise various governments across Africa, across other parts of Europe, who are very keen on seeing what the UK experience was in building out Islamic finance. So we go, we share our experiences, we share knowledge, we help build out. Ultimately, without an enabling regulatory framework, there's very little that you can do within a geography. So that tends to be our focus of our initial work to again, just to help other countries. Done a lot of work in Nigeria over the last 4 or 5 years as well, where we've met the
Brother Sham, have a question?
Assalamu alaikum. My question goes back to the discussion where we were talking about ethical and Sharia compliant. Let's talk about the word ethical, the history of it. I guess the definition of being ethical and non-ethical changes over time. What was an ethical 300 over years ago is not ethical now, and what might be ethical now might not be ethical tomorrow, because the definition is decided by the lawmakers and regulators who might or might not be influenced by the Islamic courts, of course. But how do we compare it with being Sharia compliant, especially speaking from the investment perspective? When we are choosing the investments, how do we, Brother Ziad was saying that the ethical standards of being ethical has been raised, and what might have come within the premises of ethical and what might have gone out of it, okay, might be different from what is Sharia compliant and what not. So what are those gray areas where we need to be very careful while choosing the investments, and what should be the standards and the governance put in place to make sure that we don't end up choosing a non-Sharia compliant choice in impressing the world to be ethical. Thank you.
It's a very big question. Because there's many components, of course, and in terms of what is governance, that is related to Sharia compliance and Islamic. It's a very large issue. If anybody wishes to attempt, please.
Just a couple of comments, and I think we could all probably share some perspectives on this. Absolutely right, ethical is a theme. No one person can define that. It means different things to different people, different communities and different geographies, and in different time horizons. Once we, for example, find out certain things are harmful to society, those things all of a sudden, as science tells us that information, all of a sudden they can move out of this ethical parameter. I think in Islamic finance it stops screening, it's kind of sectoral screening, which is negative screening. There are areas peculiar to Islamic finance, which we would say are, in our definition, like pork, for example, anything to do with the rearing and selling and processing of pork, whereas other people from different, from non-Islamic world might not see that as an issue, whereas tobacco, alcohol, armaments, pornography, all these other things people would have a general kind of shared value consensus on. And then beyond the sector is the actual behavior of the organization. So child labor, increasingly, something which is coming to the fore. What kind of safety, hygiene setup do you have within your factories where you create the t-shirts for Nike and X, Y, Z? So I think as market intelligence increases, as visibility increases, and I think that's part of social media today and part of the technology today, where you get these campaigns that come up against particular activities which are deemed harmful. These then start building into what people's expectations are, and that's where the asset managers will react kind of to that. Okay, yeah, if you don't want that, if you want to divest from carbon because it's polluting, that's one thing, but then you might wish to be a positive screener and say we're going to invest in carbon neutral energy technologies, right? Because we want to deal with it proactively. So it means many different things at different levels.
From an ethical perspective, if you're looking at definitions, I think we need to move away from that. Because what we're saying here is the market is moving towards socially responsible investment with a set of criteria. All we need to do is look at that set of criteria and determine whether we have matched that or we have improved on that. And ultimately, if you look at those screening criteria, and if many of them happen to be Islamically acceptable, then we need to look at our own screening and say, well, we haven't moved any. If the market has moved towards looking at companies that have emitted high levels of carbon and have stopped investing in them, then has Islamic also considered, or have Sharia compliant investments also considered divesting from these companies? So it's no longer an issue of definition per se. It's an issue of what is a good investment. As Datuk said in his discussion or in his speech on reducing that gap between ethical and Sharia compliant, remove what is harmful to society. And if we consistently adapt our screening to what is harmful to society, then we can move forward. But using a stagnant screen, that's where the problem lies.
Yeah, I would love the idea of spirit of I. I think that's where we need to be really careful on the gray areas where the ethical things might not go with the what looks on the surface might not be the same from deep inside, which is, I think, the growing Islamic finance market and industry is facing this issue, and that's why sometimes we face criticism from the competitors and the others who are just waiting out there to raise fingers on us.
Thank you. Next question.
Assalamu alaikum. I would like to address my question to Mr. Azman Zainab. As you said earlier, different states of Malaysia has a different work rule. Therefore, my question is, have you been all practitioners come across together to have an unified work rule among all states by the help of Bank Negara Malaysia? Thank you.
Can you repeat your question?
Yeah, sure.
Clark.
As you said, all of the states of the Malaysia has different
okay.
work rule. So my question
I'll
is,
call my brother here.
so my
Whether all the states have come and tried to unify that.
yes, I'm talking about you, the practitioners. Have you tried to have a unified work rule among all states of the Malaysia by the help of Bank Negara Malaysia?
We have not. We have. Okay. Let me just share with you what happened a couple of years back. Okay. There's one company trying to come up with that one product using Wakaf model, and we shared with the regulator, and he was not accepted. Okay. And after that, there has not been active research. Yes, recently only, even my within our colleagues actually, we have revisit the concept of wakaf, whether we can introduce that. Okay? But like I said just now, we are working together with Isra, the researcher, on this part. And there are some conflicting views. You got to remember this. From practitioner's perspective, if we were to change a model, it's not just overnight, because it involves a lot of work in terms of the system, the contract, because everything is programmed based on the model. It would take some time. It would take some time. The first obstacle, yes, we have to agree among all the industry players, which we have not come to that level yet. That is one.
In this part, the Bank Negara Malaysia can help you most, since they are doing a crucial part in the field of finance and economy.
Yes, they can help us because they are open to it. If you look at Takaful operational framework, if you look at the TOF, one of the stipulated rule there is if you want to come up with a new model, you have to present it back to the Bank Negara, and they are open to it. Even recently, we ourselves, Prudential Based and Takaful, come up with a new model. And I'm not going to share here, but that took us almost 1 year. And that requires a lot of changes to the system that we have to make. And all this will be cost and capital as well. So this is dilemma sometimes within the industry players. So, this is something that I agree with you. Industry players have to come together and agree. But on one side, you have to move forward with the research. On the other hand, on the other side, you have to make sure that the company itself operationally are ready to embrace this new model. Okay.
Thank you, Brother Yvert. And we'll take that as the second last question.
Okay, mine is more of like a comment rather than a question. The idea is, I'm a very small person to actually say this, but we've debated that there is a gap between SRI and Islamic bank. We always had that recipe with us, right? We just couldn't make the curry. Somebody else made the curry and is getting the benefits out of the same, right? So the part about dropping away the I from everything else. The idea is Islam has always been. I come from India, right? So we've always been in the wrong places at the wrong time, right? We've been known to do wrong things, right? Can we do this right? Get risk sharing in the right place and show that this is how it's to be done. So we could have shown that SRI can be done, but we kept debating whether it's financially possible, is it viable. Somebody else has shown. You're the best example of it. You've shown that it can be done and it's viable. So, I keep having debates with, Sukuk structuring teams as to why a profit and loss sharing Sukuk can't be done. So they say that there is no appetite for it. There's no appetite for it. There is appetite for equity. How can there be no appetite for a profit and loss sharing Sukuk? So I mean, this is just a personal opinion, obviously. You all are stalwarts of the industry, you all understand the industry better, so you all can put more light on it. But this is just, a person who's worked in the industry for about 10 odd years and been on the academic side for 2 years. This is just my comment, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I think if there aren't any further questions, we'll take the last question from the sister.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullah. I'm Nafisa. I'm a student from INSA. I would like to ask regarding on your opinion regarding on the screening process. What's your opinion in approaching the third-party agencies, or how flexible are the industries, the institutions especially, in approaching the third-party agencies like Yasa, Amiri, all of these third-party agencies to do the screening directly? For sure, we know that to standardize this criteria of this, the screening processes would take a very long period for us to actually standardize it. But by approaching the third parties, don't you think that it will create such a point, a competitive challenge among them in a short-term period? Because at the end, we for sure will like to have a unified criteria, all right? But other than by looking at, wouldn't it be giving it a good opportunity for the criteria to be like much more a bit of competition among them to give a better product or a better opportunity for them to actually create a better criteria among the third-party agencies? So we would like, because for sure that the transparency and cost, we need to look into it. But by approaching the third parties, the disclosure can actually be much more deeper because they are much more flexible in this way. What do you guys think on this?
Anyone want to? It's slightly off the topic of the panel. Screening, yeah, it's an issue of screening. And just to understand your question, you're saying why not allow third parties to be able to compete in developing more efficient screening criteria?
Yeah, approaching the third parties to do the screening.
But they are doing the screening.
But at the same time, because is everything affixed?
No, actually, you'd find that although they have guidelines, it's up to Amani and Yasar and all of these companies to be able to calculate that using detailed financial info. And that's how they can benefit from consulting fees and software fees, etc. And being able to punch in the right numbers, to be able to select the right stocks for the Sharia universe. So that is happening right now.
But are there a way for them to be much more competitive, a bit of competitive among them?
There is competition amongst them because a company that intends to use another third-party agency for screening is going to look at the most efficient, most competent company that can deliver the best results, the quickest results, the most efficient and the most deepest insights and analysis. So there is a current competition, and therefore you can select between who you'd like to utilize as your screening firm. In fact, it's patented. Some have registered trademarks on the manner in which they actually conduct their screening processes. So although they have guidelines, you must realize that they still have to go into the financials, and it can get a bit technical and complicated. So that's where these software companies, well, now they're software companies, but that's where they actually benefit from. So I'm saying that is happening.
Just to add to that and also address the prior comment, this is also with a very interesting firm in London just 2-3 weeks ago called Arabesque. And what they're doing is, one of the ways they're differentiating is they're an ESG quant-based firm, equities investment manager. what they're doing is, in addition to the sectoral screens, where you have to pull all this data to meet your financial ratios and so on, they're also doing their own, they've started to build an army of PhDs who are going into further analysis. So they're analyzing things like, when has there been any reporting of, or any restatements in their financial accounts in the last 6 months, right? Because that's an indicator that there was something went wrong somewhere, that they had to restate their accounts, or one element, or make an additional disclosure. They're looking at other events, such as what's publicly available events, information on a spillage, an incident, an XYZ, or the change in senior management, something like this, to pick up and to give them data and intelligence as to how the firm is operating beyond just the financial data that we're seeing from the Islamic screens. Then they layer on top of that their quants model, which is for the mathematicians in this room to understand better than me. But I think that's a fascinating adaptation which differentiates from some of the existing players, and goes down more towards what we're talking about, which goes back to the comment that you made, this kind of space between SRI, ethical, and Islamic, and equity-based Sukuk. The reality is, with all of these things, and I have to be very straight on this, is the current paradigm is shaped by forces that were there in the last 20, 30, 40 years. In the 1970s, they made a decision, a fundamental ontological decision, to go down the route of banking and try to create an Islamic version of that within the paradigm of banking, right? And ever since that, there's been a lot of issues and challenges and so on and so forth. We're dealing with legacy, like in the IT world, we deal with legacy systems, right? We're dealing with legacy thinking, right? Which is valid or relevant, it was all appropriate at the time. But I think the opportunity, though, moving forward, is more exciting. The reality is the industry has always been following, not leading. We've been trying to imitate conventional rather than innovate the way forward. That's the simple reality. With respect to everyone there, I'm not saying they did anything bad or it's a bad thing. It's just history, it's fact, right? You know, relative fact, I guess everything's relative, you know. The opportunity, I believe, for people in this room, the young people, the young talent in this room, because you have one weapon which is going to change everything that the old vanguard we didn't have. That is, the millennials have technology. And technology is disrupting and changing business models at a speed, at a rate, which has never been done before, never been seen before, right? So I would just encourage all of you in this room to take on the challenge, to take Islamic finance to version 2.0, to the next step. Don't worry too much or get bogged down with the old legacy stuff. Yes, that was relevant. Yes, there's a basis for that and so on. But if you want to see a change, as the quote says, you need to build an alternative reality which is more efficient, more effective, more powerful, that makes the existing model obsolete. Then you'll see real change. So I really leave that challenge with all of you.
Very nice closing remarks. Thank you, everyone. We'll just close up with a short statement from the panel, inshallah. Brother Umar, thank you very much for that. Brother Asman, if you could.
I just want to echo what Dato said. I know I'm not an expert in SRI, but one thing that caught my attention is the advice from Dato just now. We have to keep the letter of I, the spirit of I, intact, no matter what. Because yes, we are constantly under pressure from the market, but do not just give in to the pressure, because at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of Islamic finance? What is the purpose? Is it dollar and cent, or is it how we're going to answer when we go down there? That is.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very good. Make your closing remarks, please.
My closing remarks will be, let's embrace risk better. There's no shortcut in managing the risk. So,
Somebody mentioned about ethics changing from one society to another, from one time to another, and so on. I think those are societal ethics. But when you talk about Islamic ethics, they don't change. The criteria is the same. But it depends on what is contained in the Quran and the Sunnah. So that's what Islamic ethics is all about, and I do not think it will change. Right? Thank you very much.